Alpha King bought the Omega no one wanted, then froze when he saw her face. Whispers of curses and old magic mingled with the scent of incense and the metallic tang of gold. The people gathered were not ordinary citizens. They were lords, merchants, and powerful figures seeking someone lost, broken, or feared. At the center of the hall stood a raised platform, draped in deep black velvet. Chains clinked softly as figures were presented one by one. They were Omegas, people rejected by society, marked by circumstance, or whispered to be cursed. Their eyes held fear, resignation, and sometimes a flicker of hope, though few dared to believe it could last. Among the crowd, a tall, commanding figure appeared, the Alpha King. His black cloak brushed the floor with every step, and his eyes, sharp as daggers, scanned the room with quiet authority. His presence alone was enough to hush the murmurs around him. Though young, he carried the weight of his throne in every measured movement. People did not approach him lightly, and many left him in awe or fear. Tonight, however, he was not here to impress. He was searching. The first Omegas were brought forth, their chains rattling as they stood trembling on the platform. Each had a story, some whispered to be tragic, some mysterious. The crowd bid eagerly, but the Alpha King remained silent, his dark eyes observing each one carefully. None of them caught his interest. None of them held the spark he was looking for, or maybe it was something deeper, something hidden. Then she appeared. She was led forward by two guards, her movements cautious yet oddly graceful. A dark veil covered her face, and her hands were bound with thin ropes, not heavy chains. The room shifted as she stepped into the torchlight. Whispers broke out among the crowd. She was small, delicate in frame, almost fragile. But there was something in her stance, a quiet defiance, a resilience that made her seem taller than she really was. The Alpha King's gaze fell on her, and he felt a strange pull in his chest. He did not know her, or perhaps he thought he did. But the veil hid her features, and yet, in the curve of her shoulders and the tilt of her head, he sensed a memory long buried. He froze for a moment, unnoticed by the crowd, his sharp eyes tracing her figure with an intensity that made the air feel colder around him. The auctioneer's voice echoed, breaking the spell. "Who will bid for this Omega?" Bids were raised quickly. Lords and merchants competed eagerly, hoping to claim someone with rumored powers or secrets. But the Alpha King did not move. His mind was elsewhere, caught in the shadow of recognition. He had to see her face. He had to know if the flicker of memory was real. When the bidding slowed and murmurs arose that she might remain unsold, he made a decision. "I will take her," he said, his voice cutting through the hall like a sword. A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to him. It was rare for him to speak in public, and even rarer to make such a sudden purchase. The auctioneer's gavel hit the wooden stand with a loud bang. "Sold," he declared. The crowd stirred in shock, some in awe, some in curiosity. The guard stepped forward, leading the Omega toward the Alpha King's private chamber. The room seemed smaller now, as though the world itself had shrunk to the space between them. She walked slowly, her head bowed slightly, her hands bound. She did not struggle, though she could feel the weight of the king's stare upon her. When they reached a private room, the Alpha King finally spoke. His voice was low, almost cautious. "Lift your veil." She hesitated. Something in his tone was different from the others, firm but not cruel. Something made her pause, her heart beating faster. Slowly, carefully, she lifted the veil. For a heartbeat, the Alpha King could not breathe. Her face was familiar, and yet changed by time and pain. Memories struck him suddenly, faces from the past, moments thought lost forever. She was the Omega he had once known, the one who had disappeared from his life without explanation years ago. And now here she stood in his presence, bought in an auction like property, yet more human, more alive, and more untouchable than ever. She looked at him, her dark eyes meeting his, unafraid yet guarded. "Who are you?" she asked softly. There was curiosity in her voice, but also caution. She had learned the world was cruel and trust dangerous. "I am your king," he said simply, but his voice trembled slightly, betraying the storm inside. He could not move. He could not look away. "It cannot be," he whispered almost to himself. Her gaze sharpened. "What cannot be?" He shook his head, forcing his control back into his voice. I did not think I would see you again." She frowned, suspicion flashing. "You know me." "I thought I lost you," he admitted, his voice low but full of emotion. "Years ago you disappeared. I never thought." The Omega remained silent, absorbing the meaning behind his words. She did not yet know whether to trust him, and perhaps she never would fully. The memories of their past, the fleeting warmth, the unspoken bond, and the betrayals were tangled in her heart like thorns. Yet the pull between them was undeniable. He studied her carefully. She had grown stronger, sharper. Her eyes no longer held the same wide-eyed fear he remembered, but a resilience that matched his own, a fire he had not expected to see again. "You are mine now," he said, his tone firm, claiming her in the way he thought he must. But in truth, he did not fully understand what that meant anymore. Ownership could not define this connection, and he sensed it, even if he could not speak it aloud. She met his gaze evenly. "I am not yours," she said softly. "Not yet." The tension in the room was thick, almost tangible. They were two forces, once intertwined and now separated by years of pain, power, and circumstance. Each word, each look, carried history and longing, anger and unspoken fear. The Alpha King's eyes narrowed, trying to regain control. He could not afford weakness. He ruled a kingdom of shadows, where power meant survival. Yet something inside him had shifted, and the Omega's presence was a catalyst. He wanted to protect her, yes, but he also feared what he felt, what she made him feel. "You will stay in the palace," he commanded. "You will be safe, and you will answer my questions when I choose to ask them." She inclined her head slightly, acknowledging his words, but there was a subtle defiance in her stance. She would not be cowed so easily, even by a king, and he would not have it any other way. As she was led to her quarters, he lingered in the doorway, watching her disappear down the hall. The veil of the past had lifted, but the path forward was unclear. Shadows danced across the walls, flickering like the memories he could not yet grasp, and the weight of unspoken words hung heavy in the room. For the first time in many years, the Alpha King felt uncertain, vulnerable, but also alive in a way he had not experienced in decades. Outside, the night wind howled across the kingdom. Somewhere far away, a wolf's cry echoed through the darkness, as if acknowledging the reunion of two lost souls. And deep in the chamber, the Alpha King stood frozen, his thoughts consumed by one impossible truth. She was here. She was real, and she had returned. But why now? And why, after all these years, had fate brought her back to him in a place meant for the lost and forgotten? The questions lingered as the torches flickered and the shadows stretched, hinting at dangers yet unseen, secrets yet unrevealed, and a bond that would be tested like never before. He knew one thing for certain: nothing in his life, or his kingdom, would ever be the same again. The palace was a vast labyrinth of stone corridors and shadowed halls. Its walls were carved with tales of kings and battles long past, and magic hummed faintly beneath the floors, as if the building itself had a heartbeat. Torchlight flickered, casting golden streaks across the cold marble. Every step echoed in the empty spaces, and even the guards seemed to move cautiously, aware that some parts of the palace were not meant for ordinary eyes. The Omega was brought to her quarters, a small room tucked deep within the eastern wing. Though modest, it had tall windows that overlooked the dark forest surrounding the castle. Moonlight spilled across the floor, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits in the still air. She stepped inside, her hands still bound, and let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding. For the first time in years, she was under a roof that was safe from the chaos of the world outside. Yet the weight of being claimed by the Alpha King pressed heavily upon her. She could feel his presence even when he was not in the room. There was power in it, a command that demanded respect and obedience, but also something more fragile, something unspoken that made her heart tighten. The door creaked open and the Alpha King stepped in. He did not announce himself with guards or threats. He simply appeared, a shadow among shadows. His dark eyes studied her carefully, scanning for reactions, for fear, for defiance. He found all three and yet more, a spark of determination, a flicker of fire in her gaze that reminded him of someone he had once known. "You are safe here," he said quietly, though there was a hardness under the words, a kingly command that allowed no argument. "No one will harm you inside these walls." She looked at him, her dark eyes cautious. "Safe, yes, perhaps, but why me? Why now? And why claim me as if I am property?" Her voice was soft, but each word was deliberate, carefully measured. She would not give him the satisfaction of fear. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he studied her, as if weighing his next words against the truth of what he felt. "Because you belong here," he said finally, the words strange even to his own ears. "Not because I claim you, but because I thought I lost you once, and I cannot lose you again." Her breath caught. The weight of the words, the strange familiarity, the power behind them, it was almost too much. She wanted to look away, to retreat to the safety of her thoughts, but she could not. Something in him, some old bond buried beneath layers of time and memory, drew her in, even as she resisted. "You think you know me," she said softly, "but you do not fully, not anymore." "I know enough," he replied, his voice steady but low, carrying a storm of emotion he could not yet name. "Enough to know that the world outside these walls is cruel, that you have suffered, that you survived. And enough to know that I will protect you, even if you do not want me to." She looked down, silent for a moment, then slowly, carefully unbound her hands. The ropes fell to the floor and she flexed her fingers, testing their freedom. She had learned long ago that freedom was never permanent, but in this small room, under his watchful gaze, she could feel it, even briefly. He watched her every move, a tension in his posture that was unusual for a king used to command. Normally, he was always in control, always certain. But with her, control felt like a fragile thing, a delicate thread that could snap at any moment. And he realized with an unfamiliar ache that perhaps control was not what he wanted, not completely. Over the next few days, the Omega was shown the palace and introduced to the rules she would have to follow. She met the servants, the guards, and the scholars who whispered of her rumored powers. Many looked at her with curiosity, some with fear, and others with a strange mixture of respect and awe. The palace was alive with subtle magic, ancient and patient, and it seemed to respond to her presence, as if recognizing her hidden strength. The Alpha King remained close, though not always visible. He observed her, sometimes from a distance, sometimes in sudden appearances that startled her. Their interactions were tense, a dance of words and glances. He would ask questions, probing gently but firmly, and she would answer carefully, revealing pieces of herself while guarding others. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the palace was bathed in a golden glow, they walked together along the balcony overlooking the forest. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying scents of pine and damp earth. The king stood silently looking at the horizon, but she sensed his mind was elsewhere. "You are thinking of the past," she said quietly. He turned to her, his dark eyes searching hers. "And if I am?" he asked. "The past is complicated. But sometimes the past is the only thing that can explain the present." She nodded slowly, understanding the weight behind his words. They shared a silence then, one filled with memories neither had spoken aloud, memories that tugged at their hearts and reminded them of bonds that had never truly broken. But the calm did not last. That night, a disturbance echoed through the palace. A guard rushed past her door, shouting warnings, and the Alpha King appeared, his cloak whipping behind him, eyes sharp and fierce. Something had breached the outer walls of the palace, not an ordinary threat, but something more sinister. Shadows moved with unnatural speed, and whispers of curses floated in the air like smoke. Without hesitation, the Omega followed him. She had no weapons, but instinct and a strange energy within her guided her steps. She arrived just in time to see a shadowy figure loom over one of the servants. In a swift motion, she intervened, stepping between the danger and the person she had never met but felt compelled to protect. A burst of light, faint but powerful, emanated from her hands. The shadow recoiled, hissing, and vanished into the darkness. The Alpha King stared, his breath caught in his chest. You did that?" he asked, his voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. She nodded, her chest heaving. "I did what I had to." For a long moment he simply looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. Not the Omega at the auction, not the girl from the past, but a force of her own, capable and dangerous and brilliant. "You are more than I imagined," he said finally, his voice low, almost reverent. "And more than I expected." She met his gaze evenly, holding her ground. "I am still me," she said softly. "Not yours, not anyone's. I survived this long alone. That will not change." The tension between them deepened. Desire and fear, trust and doubt, all twisted together like strands of a rope about to snap. He had bought her at an auction, yes, but that did not mean he understood her, nor that she belonged entirely to him. And yet every fiber of his being was drawn to her, compelled to protect her, to understand her, to reclaim something lost long ago. In the following days, they trained together. Not with swords, but with skill, awareness, and control of the subtle magic that lingered in the palace. She taught him things he had not known, skills that surprised even the Alpha King. And he, in turn, revealed the intricacies of the palace, the dangers lurking within, and the responsibilities that came with power. Slowly, a bond began to form, not of ownership, but of understanding. They could challenge each other, push each other, and yet depend on one another in ways that neither expected. And yet, beneath it all, the shadow of the past and the threat of the curse loomed, reminding them that peace was fragile and time was fleeting. One evening, as the moon rose high, they stood together on the balcony once more. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a night bird. He looked at her, searching, and she met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "You are dangerous," he said softly, almost a warning. "I have always been," she replied, her voice calm but firm, "but so have you." For a moment neither spoke. Then he extended his hand, not commanding, not claiming, but offering. "Walk with me," he said. "Let us face this together. At least try." She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. The warmth of his touch, the certainty in his grip, and the unspoken promise behind his words created a bridge between them, fragile, delicate, and unbreakable all at once. As they walked back inside, shadows shifted in the corners of the palace, whispers of curses and secrets stirring in the dark. Danger was not gone, and the past had not yet released its hold. But for this one night, in this quiet connection, they found a moment of understanding, a glimmer of hope, and a recognition that together, they might face whatever the future held. And deep in the silence, the Alpha King realized something he had long denied. The Omega he thought he lost had returned, and nothing would ever be the same again. The night air was heavy with mist as the Alpha King led the Omega through the hidden corridors of the palace. Moonlight filtered through the tall windows, painting silver streaks across the cold stone floors. Each step echoed softly, but it was the silence between them that spoke loudest, a silence filled with questions neither dared to voice aloud. The Alpha King's mind was restless. Since the incident with the shadow in the servants' quarters, he had been unable to stop thinking about her. Not just her presence, but the strange energy that radiated from her. It was not just magic, something deeper, older, and stronger. He remembered now, memories he had buried long ago, and he realized that what he felt for her was not only past attachment, it was a connection that defied time and logic. "You have power," he said quietly, breaking the silence. "Stronger than I expected." She looked at him, her dark eyes steady, and yet there was a flicker of caution. "It is not strength I chose," she said softly. "It is something I was born with. I cannot ignore it, nor can I fully control it yet." He nodded slowly, considering her words. "And yet you used it to save someone tonight, without hesitation. That tells me more than you realize." They walked on, deeper into the palace, toward a section few knew existed. Ancient ruins lay beneath the foundation, hidden corridors where magic lingered thick and palpable. Only those who understood its language could walk safely. Tonight, the Alpha King wanted to show her these secrets. He wanted her to see the world as he did, not as an outsider, but as someone who could be more than she had ever imagined. The Omega followed cautiously. "Why show me this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why share something so dangerous?" "Because you are part of it," he replied. "Whether you like it or not, your presence here changes things, and I need you to understand that. I need you to see the truth of what you are, and what this kingdom is." They entered a chamber beneath the palace, a wide circular room lined with pillars carved with runes that glowed faintly in the dim light. The air was thick with the scent of earth and old magic. In the center of the room, a pool of water reflected the moonlight, rippling as if alive. "This place is old," he said, stepping closer to the edge of the pool. "Older than the palace above. Magic lives here and it remembers everything. It remembers us." She leaned closer, curiosity overcoming caution. "Remembers us?" "Yes," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "It remembers the choices we made, the people we lost, the paths we did not take, and perhaps it remembers the path we are meant to take now." She studied the pool, feeling a pull in her chest. There was something familiar about this place, though she could not explain it. Her past whispered in her mind, memories half forgotten, shadows of someone she had once known, someone who had cared for her deeply. "You speak in riddles," she said softly, turning to face him. "I do not understand." He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in a way that made her heart race. "You will understand," he said, his gaze intense. "But first you must trust me. You must trust that I will not let the past hurt you again." The Omega's gaze softened, but caution remained. "Trust is not given lightly," she said, "and you have not earned mine fully yet." He nodded, accepting the challenge, but his eyes never left hers. "Then we shall begin," he said. "We shall learn together." Over the next few days, the Alpha King guided her through the hidden chambers beneath the palace. He taught her to focus her energy, to understand the flow of magic, to recognize threats that were invisible to the ordinary eye. She learned quickly, surprising him at every turn. Her power was not just raw, it was precise, deliberate and fearless. "You have a gift," he said one evening as they practiced in a chamber lit only by moonlight and the glow of runes. "Few possess such control so early. It is rare." "I did what I had to," she replied, her voice calm, though her heart raced from the exertion. "I survived because I learned I could not afford to fail." "And yet," he said, stepping closer, "you also saved me in a way I did not expect." She blinked, caught off guard. How could I?" "You do not yet understand," he interrupted softly. "But one day you will. And when that day comes, you will see that what we have is not only power, it is connection, something old, something neither of us can deny." Her gaze fell to the ground, and for a moment, silence filled the room again. She felt the weight of his words, the truth behind them, and the pull of memories she had tried to forget. But even as she hesitated, she felt something shift inside her, a spark of hope, of recognition, of trust. Days passed, and with each day, the bond between them grew stronger. They sparred not only with magic but with words, testing each other's limits, pushing boundaries and uncovering truths long hidden. She challenged his authority, forcing him to see her not as a possession but as a person, strong, capable, and unwilling to bend blindly to his will. And he, in turn, revealed moments of vulnerability, showing her that even a king could feel fear, doubt, and longing. One evening, as the sun set behind the forest, painting the sky in shades of red and gold, they stood together on the balcony overlooking the kingdom. The wind rustled the trees, carrying a faint scent of wildflowers and rain. "You have changed," she said quietly. "Not just since the auction, but since the moment we met again. You are softer in a way, but also harder, stronger." He looked at her, and a shadow of a smile flickered across his lips. "You notice everything," he said, "perhaps too much." "I notice because it matters," she replied. "You matter, this kingdom matters, and you, whatever bond we share, it matters. I cannot ignore it." He took a step closer, the air between them charged with unspoken emotion. "And yet you still resist me," he said softly. "Even now, after everything." "I must," she said, meeting his gaze steadily, "because if I do not, I risk losing myself, and I cannot afford that, not again." The tension between them was palpable, a delicate balance of desire, fear, and longing. Neither spoke for several moments, letting the wind carry away words that could not yet be shared. And yet, in that silence, their connection deepened, a bond forged not through possession or power, but through understanding, trust, and mutual respect. But even as they stood together, the shadow of the past lingered. A warning whispered through the palace, a reminder that danger was never far. Rumors of a curse tied to her bloodline had reached the king's ears, and he knew that it was more than mere superstition. Something dark and ancient had been set in motion, a force that could threaten not only her life but the entire kingdom. One night, as they studied the runes in the hidden chambers, a vision appeared in the pool of water. Shadows twisted and writhed, forming shapes that were both familiar and terrifying. The Omega gasped, stepping back, and the king reached out, steadying her with a firm hand. "What is it?" she asked, fear and awe mingling in her voice. "The curse," he said, his tone heavy. "It is stronger than I imagined. And it is not just a threat to you, it is a threat to everything we hold dear. Someone is manipulating it, someone who knows how to use it for power." Her eyes widened. "Then we must stop it, together." He nodded, his grip on her hand tightening slightly. "Together," he agreed. "But be warned, this path will test us both. Our strengths, our fears, our hearts. Nothing will be easy, and some truths may be more dangerous than you can imagine." She drew a deep breath, her resolve hardening. "I am not afraid," she said, though the tremor in her voice betrayed a fraction of her fear. "I will face it, whatever it takes." The Alpha King studied her, pride and awe in his gaze. She was more than an Omega. She was a force, a survivor, a companion in the truest sense. And yet he knew that their journey was only beginning. As they left the chamber, the moonlight falling over the palace like silver fire, neither spoke, but both understood. The curse was not yet broken. The danger was not yet gone. And the path ahead would be filled with trials that would test their bond, their strength, and their hearts. But for the first time, they faced it not as master and servant, king and subject, or lost souls alone, but together. And that, perhaps, was the only thing that could give them hope. And in the deepest shadows of the palace, whispers stirred. Something ancient and dark watched them, waiting, patient. The Omega's powers, the Alpha King's strength, and their bond were known to it, and it would not rest until it had its reckoning. The castle stood silent under a moonless sky. Shadows crept across the walls, twisting like living things, as if the palace itself was aware that something momentous was about to unfold. The air was thick, heavy with anticipation, carrying the scent of earth and the faint trace of magic that had always lingered in its corners. The Alpha King moved through the corridors silently, his black cloak brushing the stone floors, his eyes sharp and alert. The Omega followed closely behind. Her senses were heightened, every movement measured, every sound noticed. She felt the tension in the air, the subtle thrum of magic pulsing beneath the floors. The curse that had haunted her bloodline for generations was awake, and its presence was strong. The king had warned her. This night would test them both, not only in power but in heart. "You are ready?" he asked softly, his voice low but steady. She nodded, her jaw set, though her hands trembled slightly. "I have no choice," she replied. "I will face this, whatever it is, together." The Alpha King's gaze softened, a rare vulnerability showing in the darkness. "Good," he said. "Because nothing in this castle, in this world, will prepare us for what lies ahead." They reached the central chamber, a grand hall that had long been sealed. Its walls were carved with ancient symbols, and a large circular sigil covered the floor. In the center, a faint glow pulsed, illuminating the hall with an otherworldly light. Shadows moved along the edges of the room, curling and twisting as though alive, whispering in voices that sounded both familiar and alien. The Omega stepped forward, her heart hammering in her chest. She could feel the curse around them, thick and oppressive, reaching out as if trying to consume everything in its path. She closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself, and when she opened them again there was determination there, hard and steady. The Alpha King placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Remember," he said, "the curse feeds on fear, on doubt, on division. We must face it together. Trust me and trust yourself." She nodded. "I will." A shadow detached itself from the wall, moving like liquid darkness. It coalesced into a form, tall, imposing, with eyes that glowed like embers. The room grew colder, the light from the sigil flickering as if struggling against the darkness. "You cannot stop me," the figure hissed, its voice echoing unnaturally through the chamber. "The curse is mine to control. The kingdom, the Omega, all of it will belong to me." The Omega stepped forward, her own hands glowing faintly with power. "You are wrong," she said, her voice steady. "This curse is mine to confront, mine to overcome. You will not control me, nor my life, nor this kingdom." The Alpha King moved beside her, his presence a shield of strength. "She is not alone," he said, his voice sharp and commanding. "And neither am I. Together we are stronger than your darkness." The shadow lunged, moving faster than the eye could follow. The Omega raised her hands, and a surge of light erupted from her palms. The shadow recoiled, hissing, and the Alpha King drew his sword, its blade shimmering with faint magic. They moved in perfect unison, the light from her hands and the strength of his blade forming a circle of defense that held the darkness at bay. "You cannot win," she shouted, her voice rising above the roar of magic and shadow. "We are stronger than fear." The shadow writhed, twisting into forms of memories, illusions of past failures and faces meant to unnerve them. But the Omega held firm, her focus unbroken. She realized that the true strength of her power came not from magic alone, but from trust, from courage, and from the bond she shared with the king. "You have grown stronger than I imagined," the Alpha King said, his eyes never leaving the battle. "And stronger than the curse expected." They pushed forward together, light and steel moving as one. The shadow shrieked, lashing out, but each attack was met with their combined force. Slowly they began to corner it, forcing it toward the center of the sigil. The Omega's energy flared brightly, brighter than ever before, and the Alpha King's sword glowed as he struck precise, controlled blows. In that moment, time seemed to slow. The Omega felt every emotion clearly: fear, courage, anger, hope. She realized that the curse had fed not on magic, but on doubt, on the fear of losing the king, on the weight of her own past. And now she no longer feared. She no longer doubted. With a final surge of energy, she raised her hands high, sending a beam of pure light into the heart of the shadow. The Alpha King struck the final blow, his sword piercing the center of the darkness. There was a deafening silence, a sudden calm, and then the shadow dissolved into nothingness. The room was quiet. The sigil on the floor glowed faintly, then faded. The air grew lighter, warmer, and the oppressive weight of the curse lifted. The Omega fell to her knees, exhausted, her chest heaving. The Alpha King knelt beside her, placing a steadying hand on her back. "You did it," he said softly. "We did it." She looked up at him, a mixture of relief and awe in her eyes. "We together," she whispered, her voice trembling but strong. He helped her to her feet. For a long moment they simply stood there looking at each other, feeling the gravity of what they had survived. The darkness was gone, but the lessons remained. They had faced fear, power, and themselves, and emerged stronger, united in a bond neither could deny. "You have changed me," he said finally, his voice quiet, almost unsteady. "Not just tonight, but from the moment I saw you again. You remind me of what I lost and what I still have." She smiled faintly, her own emotions unsteady. "And you have changed me. I feared you, and yet I trusted you. I feared the curse, and yet I faced it with you. I never imagined I could feel safe and strong at the same time." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You are more than I ever imagined," he said. "More than I deserve, perhaps, but I will not let you go again. Not now, not ever." Her gaze softened, and for the first time in years she allowed herself to feel the depth of what had returned between them. I do not know what the future holds," she said softly. "But I do know this: I will not face it alone if you are with me." They stood together in the chamber, the echoes of their journey surrounding them. Outside, the moon began to rise again, casting gentle light through the windows. The kingdom was safe, for now, but they both knew that challenges would come, as they always did. Yet for the first time they were ready to face them together. In the days that followed, the palace slowly returned to normal. The shadows that had haunted its corridors were gone, replaced by a sense of calm and renewal. The Omega explored her quarters and the castle with new eyes, discovering spaces she had never imagined. She met with scholars who sought to understand her abilities and servants who offered quiet smiles of respect. And everywhere she went, the Alpha King was near, silent but present, a constant anchor in a world that had once felt unsteady. Their relationship deepened, not through words alone, but through trust, shared experience, and understanding. They sparred with magic and practiced strategy, but they also shared quiet moments in the moonlight, conversations that revealed vulnerabilities, and glances that spoke more than words ever could. One evening, as they walked through the palace gardens, the king paused beside a fountain. The water glimmered under the lantern light, rippling gently with the movement of the air. He turned to her, taking her hands in his. "You are mine in every way that matters," he said, his voice low but unwavering. "Not as property, not as a subject, but as someone I trust, respect, and care for more than I can say." She met his gaze, her own eyes shining. "And you are mine," she replied softly. "Not because I must be, but because I choose to be. Because I trust you, and because I cannot imagine facing this world without you." A smile flickered on his lips, rare and genuine. "Then we are stronger than the past, stronger than fear, and stronger than any curse that dares challenge us." They stood together, hand in hand, feeling the quiet strength of their bond. Outside the gardens, the palace stretched under the starlit sky, its ancient stones standing as a testament to endurance, power, and history. Inside, two souls once separated by time, fear, and circumstance had reunited, their bond forged in trials, trust, and courage. The Omega leaned against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart, a rhythm that had once seemed distant and now felt like home. The Alpha King, in turn, felt a warmth he had long denied himself, a sense of peace tempered by the knowledge that life would always bring challenges, but they would face them together. And in the quiet of the palace, beneath the glow of moonlight and stars, they knew something undeniable. They were no longer lost, no longer alone, and no longer bound by the fear of the past. Together, they were unstoppable. The kingdom awaited them, full of challenges, whispers of magic, and shadows yet to confront. But they had found something greater than any curse, any shadow, or any fear. They had found each other, and that was enough.